today's episode, What AI Exposes About Design, an interesting article from Alessandro Molinari on Medium, Agentic commerce workflows, and Meta turning to AI to make shopping easier on both Instagram and Facebook.
One, two, three, four.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in again. Jeremy here from the UX Change podcast, and today we will review three, let's say, latest articles that I could review on the intersect between AI and user experience, and I will try to cover them as accurately as possible, because I had a quick read of them. The first one being from Alessandro Molinari on Medium. I really encourage you to read that if you're a user experience professional. So Alessandro is sharing a lot of ideas in this article, and I could have a read. So I hope I will not butcher his ideas, but I resonate with quite a lot of them, to be honest. He also covers user experience research, by the way, not only design, as it is oftentimes the case when we study the impact of AI on user experience. We tend to focus only on design. And so in this article, he's defending that the process is shrinking. AI is making things, let's say, quicker, of course, not surprisingly, and the fact that, let's say, product engineering and development are no longer bottlenecks, and so it might be the steps that are upper in the double diamond process, let's say, that could be. And so we need to adapt. That's my understanding, that's my reading of this article. Also, that was really interesting, this aspect when he talks about the fact that, there is a kind of regression with this LLM's interaction when we interact with technology. Because before we had a command line in the very beginning of interacting with computers, we had the command line when we would send commands to a terminal, and so that was through text. And then we had to change that so that we had to come up with, let's say, understandable metaphors, as Alessandro shares in his article, like desktop, folders, files, and so on, to make it easier for a human to communicate with a computer. And right now we are kind of regressing that's his ideas to a text interface again, and we use another metaphor again, because we use the metaphor of natural language understanding. And so for me that's really interesting, because we went from one aspect, which is, okay, maybe this is restrictive to have to talk to a machine with certain commands and only through text, and we expanded the possibilities, and we expanded on the metaphor side to make it easier for people to understand and to communicate with machines. And now we make the choice that everything should be through text. And this is something that I already covered in previous episodes. And so that's why I'm really interested in this idea. Like, what is the impact on people's experience when they use technology, of having to focus on only one modality, at least for now. I guess this will change, and I guess this is not the only pattern. You could see maybe on using several tools, having AI embedded. This is not the only pattern anymore, although it is quite prevalent, the idea of having only to talk to AI with chat. But yeah, this is not the only one. I saw some apps, for instance, or some websites in which AI is kind of embedded. I'm not a pro, but from what I can remember, the Adobe suite, for instance, you can have this in context. So this is the idea that you still have your graphical user interface, and then you can perform some AI operations on top of it. Or we can imagine with Apple Intelligence, for instance, that's another example. Although I haven't tried it a lot, but the few times I could try, I could see that this is more in context. So that's an idea, and that was really interesting to read. What else before I forget? So what can we do? Oh, yeah, so really interestingly, Alessandro proposes options so that we can adapt to this, let's say, arrival of AI and this impact on the user experience. And what I really liked is that he tended to focus on the how can I say, the primordials, let's say, the basics. We should consider things holistically. And so focusing on what was called service design from the beginning. And I really like this idea because this is really tied to the idea of jobs to be done. We need to focus on what users are using something for. And usually the jobs to be done framework tells us that it's to accomplish a goal, to accomplish an outcome. That's it. We have that in mind, and then we use technology or we use products to answer that need. So that's really something to keep in mind. Not placing AI everywhere. If you listen to my previous episode from talking about Windows, where they tried to place AI everywhere, and then there was some, let's say, pushback from the users. That's what I'm talking about. The idea of the speed factor, that's really, really interesting. And also, I would add to that. So Alessandro is talking about the speed factor, the idea that we can have everything more quickly, because creating interfaces is starting to be commoditized. It's really easy. You prompt an AI and you have an interface. But with everything being commoditized, there are some implications. If it's so easy, what is the value of it? So the value must be elsewhere, right? If you can have a UI at the tip of your fingers and everyone can do it, every human being can now prompt an AI and get a UI, that means the value is not there. The value is in a UI, certainly, but if it's done right and if it answers users' needs, that's the main aspect. And so, yeah, of course, Alessandro reminds us of that, the idea that we can create prototype that we can test in hours rather than days. Now, if you are a user experience researcher, that's amazing because you can create prototypes yourself and you can use that in your usability studies. Then if you are working in a corporate or even a medium and small business, and maybe you have some design systems in place, there is also the communication aspect to be careful when you talk with customers, because every time you show something to customers, they might have expectations regarding the new releases. So ultimately, you need to partner with designers to make sure that you are not like over-promising, at least so that customers don't understand it this way. I hope this is clear, but this is the aspect that as user experience researchers, I would be a strong advocate of. If we have a usability study to make, and if we have some hypotheses, but originally we wouldn't have time to design for all of these hypotheses to validate them, well, now with AI we could. I'm not saying who should do it, if it should be a user experience researcher or a designer, but at least now we can. And I think the main bottleneck here would be to bring the design system and the branding guidelines and so on, so that it's done quickly and done well, quite well. I'm not a pro. I'm not a designer professional, so please don't hold me accountable for it. So yeah, we can test prototypes way faster. That's one big win, and then another win for user experience research could be the idea of digital twin, or in this case, design twin, that I find really, really interesting. I myself thought about this idea quite a lot in the past. So if we unpack that, what is that? So digital twin is the idea that, sorry in advance, I might butcher the idea shared by Alessandro, but that's more or less what I think, which is if given enough data to a machine, they could potentially, to some extent, approximate who you are, of course, relatively speaking, it's like let's say orders of magnitude less than who you are. I'm not saying that should be perfect, but on one dimension, which is you being a consumer and you purchasing a product, let's say if we have enough data about you, we can replicate to some extent what you would like or don't like, and so on and so forth. So that's the idea of the design twin. Again, I read that quickly, but I get the sense that, of course, using all the data we have about customer feedback, we could train models so that whenever we have an idea, before showing that to customer, we can accelerate the feedback process with intermediate levels of feedback. So, for instance, I have my e-commerce consumers who I know are, let's say, executives at corporate. So I have built a persona and I have all of their, let's say, interactions from the past, one-to-one interactions. And so I have their transcripts and so on, and I have data about them. So I can create a digital persona or a design twin, and every time I have a question, I can turn to them. The problem that Alessandro shares, and I totally agree with that, is that if you do that in a silo, if you think that that represents fully your persona and your end user, that's the real danger. Because you will be in a vacuum, isolated from your end user, if you only rely on that. It's like if you only read the same articles again and again and again without reading new articles and updating every day. So that's the idea that you will talk to a ghost, ultimately. So I really like this idea. So it's the idea that you should pair that with continuous discovery. So it's the idea of Teresa Torres. So ongoing practice of learning about customers and their needs, by research sprints that are not necessarily focused on a product decision. So, or let's say a product research dedicated project. That's what I mean. So yeah, that's more or less the idea. In a nutshell, going quicker, expanding possibilities and horizons. We can use AI to create prototypes quicker. It comes at a cost, of course. We can leverage, of course, AI for user experience research to make it quicker. But again, I think that everything is context, of course. AI is trained on models. Models are trained on data that is all over the web. And so what we have right now is something that is like medium and average. If you want to make it yours, it can be yours, but you need to provide it your data. So it can do everything, but provided you give it everything. So let's say your brand guidelines, your tone of voice, your user research scripts, your user research plans, all of that. And once you have that, you can approximate the result that you expect to have. And this is the same for the digital twins. The more you give it data, the better it will be. And it needs to be a living process, of course. So that's more or less in a nutshell what I gathered from this article. Also some first thoughts. I really loved it. So kudos to Alessandro for writing that. What else? We have Agentic Commerce. So we have an article from MIT Technology Review sharing that, well, in the future, and that's coming, of course, we will have digital agents to make purchases for us. The problem is that, the risk is that there is a danger associated to that. So, for instance, we could say to a digital agent, use my money or use my points and book a family trip to Italy, as the article says at the very beginning. Keep it within budget, pick hotels we've liked before, and handle the details. So we can imagine all the ways that this can go wrong. And what I liked about the article is that it provides some guidelines to avoid that. So first and foremost, we should always represent all the flow that we go through when a user does something. So that's the idea of the service blueprint, the user journey, the user flows, all of that. It's mapping everything. and that will allow you to approximate as much as possible to their task, to make sure that you're doing every little step as you should. So for instance, if I want to reproduce what a user experience researcher does when they create a research plan, or maybe a user research script, I need to go to the very, very, very granular level to make sure I'm not making any mistake. I need to imagine I'm talking to an intern, reproducing the task, and this intern is trying to do it, but this intern doesn't know anything about how you do the task. So for instance, how do you do a user research script? Okay, well, I start with a blank page. Well, I can also copy a past user research script, and I can also work from a template. To start with, you have 3 possibilities, maybe more. And so then you take your user research plan, you take your objectives, and each objective, you translate that to user research questions. And each user research question, how do you translate that? How do you translate user research objective into research questions? We have a template. We have a way of doing. So some people like to think about how can we, even in research questions, that I have seen that, and maybe I have talked about that in previous episodes. So there was that. There are also some rules. No more than 3 to 5 user research questions per objective. The research question should contain an action verb and a research action verb. So for instance, I'm conflating here with objectives, but you get the idea. So you provided a template to make sure that it does it this way. And so you need to decompose really, really a lot, all the steps you need to go through. So in the case of an agent performing a purchase for you, which is kind of a traditional example here now in the world of agents, you should start with the actors. Who are they? Who is the individual making the purchase? Who is the agent? Who is the merchant or supplier? Who holds liability if the agent acts with permission but against user intent? And then one of the first steps that the article mentions is, of course, making sure that if there are failures, where they should happen and how can we circumvent that. So product truth, payee truth, identity truth, that's the idea. And so providing context, like really, that's really important. I think the future is really providing as much context to the AI as possible. And I think that's a reason why we have this new paradigm of mixing AI interaction with giving it more context. So if you listened yesterday's episode, or maybe the day before yesterday, I talk about the idea that I don't understand why these days we have at the same time the arrival of AI, and at the same time we are opening the gates to our computers, to our folders and everything. And I think that there is a mixing of two ideas, but at the same time I kind of understand it, because AI needs context to perform their tasks better. If now you ask an AI to do a PowerPoint for you, it will do it, but if you just say that, it will do it like pretty how can I say, without flavor. It will be super standard. But if you give it your brand guidelines, your company template, your way of making the PPT, it will reproduce it the way you do. So yeah, giving context, that's really important. And then we have the MIT Technology Review mentioning what are things we should do in the next 12 to 24 months as leaders in AI. And let me preface this by saying that anyone can be a leader in AI. If you implement AI in any way in your job, you can be a leader in AI. That doesn't matter if you're a leader like a CEO or if you're a junior user researcher. If you use AI at any step, you have the way to think about it and challenge a bit the status quo and do things better. So we should treat agents as identities, as the article says. But I would go, maybe that's the same idea, but I would rephrase that. I would say as entities. An agent is an entity. It's like if you give your request and your work to someone who's doing it for you. I like to think about this as an intern, so that it forces me, and I have nothing against interns, I have been an intern myself, but it's the idea that an intern is a good example, because when you're an intern, you oftentimes have no knowledge about the company, and on top of that, you need to be training. So that allows me, this metaphor, to prepare my data better and my requests better for the agents. And prioritize your, let's say, the scenario in which the cost of being wrong is the highest. So that's the one you need to define the best, the better. And then there are other, let's say, guidelines. Build a reusable context service that every workflow an agent can call. Okay. Oh yeah, and there was the idea of compressing signals, because that's a really good idea. It's the fact that the more and more with more and more use of AI, and if we need AI to be every time closer to, let's say, to the style and tone and following the guidelines that we ourselves follow, we will need to provide context. So that means that every time the AI should load context on every conversation. So concretely speaking, you give it a folder with your brand guidelines, your past research plans, your templates, and so on. But every time it needs to load that. So that takes a lot. So that can potentially slow them down. So imagine you're an AI performing some purchase online. You need to have all the context about the user. You need to think that the user, what are their preferences, what do they use to buy, and so on and so forth. You need to have their data regarding their payment information, and so on and so forth. And this can take time to load. So this recommendation that I'm giving, and that the MIT is giving, by the way, that I'm just rephrasing, is not maybe for user researchers or user experience designers, but maybe more for engineers or developers, is to try to make that as quick as possible, this loading the context. And yeah, that's basically the ideas. I really encourage you to read these articles. I will share that in the show notes. And finally, we have Meta turning to AI to make shopping easier on Instagram and Facebook. So it's basically the idea to inform and potentially influence shoppers to increase sales on the company's social media platform. So they use generative AI to enhance product reviews. This way, users will not have to read through hundreds of reviews to get a sense of what people say about a given product. So basically that. I am seeing some screenshots right now as I'm speaking. And we have, for instance, the product. We have the big call to action at the very top, add to cart, and below we have a description about the product. And this is AI generated. What I can say right now from these screens, I may not have all context, so I'm sorry in advance if this is wrong, but what I'm seeing is that, for instance, it lacks the sources. So for instance, I'm seeing a daily moisturizer at $67. So that's a screen. I'm not on Instagram right now, and I'm not on Facebook. By the way, I'm not on these platforms. But what I'm seeing is on TechCrunch, the article, there's a screenshot about this daily moisturizer, and then there is a summary, and then there is an about the brand below and follow. And for me, like right now, I'm just thinking, this is loaded with a drawer, kind of. I don't know how this is called in UI patterns. This is a drawer. Maybe you're familiar with that. And you can close it with, there is a handle at the top, and this is superimposed on top of the page you're currently visiting. I really don't understand this pattern. Sometimes it's useful, but it's not always useful because it uses space. It actually the contrary. It's not using all the space it could use to display all the information needed before someone makes a purchase. So we are talking about a daily moisturizer at $67 that may or may not be expensive depending on your expectations, your needs, your budget. But we can also think about maybe a television or a smartphone. So this could happen at any price range. And what I'm seeing is you have a big add to cart button, and then below you have a description of what it is, but this is based on AI. And apparently, well, as it says in the article TechCrunch, they say that the feature summarizes across user reviews. So this is great in itself. In my opinion, this is great. I like that feature because when I want to purchase something, what I used to do is I go to Reddit answers, and it uses a generated summary of what people say on Reddit about the product. But what I prefer about Reddit answers is that it provides the sources to the actual threads. So I can click on it and then read individual threads. And sometimes you do have more info into each of those threads. So I think that's something that is missing here. We are overemphasizing on the purchase action. We are overemphasizing on the summary, and we don't provide transparency to the user if they want to deep dive. Well, they could close the app, go to Google, search, but then what does the app... I don't know. It could help in some occasions, but I think we are placing too much emphasis on the purchase. And so again, when we use AI, again, that's the main topic here. It's a tool and sometimes a feature, but it doesn't substitute, let's say, considering the needs of the user at a broader level. So as a user, if I were a user and I were purchasing something, I don't know. Yeah, this is summarized on maybe thousands of users. Great. But who are these users? What are they saying? In what circumstances? Maybe I want to know more. And this is missing. Anyways, so that's my really quick reaction to this. The sources, lacking the sources. Anyways, but that could be something great. Maybe it can save you time. Yeah, I don't know if it will save you money, but it can save you time. Okay, well, that was it for today. So what AI exposes about design, great article from Alessandro, Agentic Commerce from MIT Technology Review, and Meta turning to AI to make shopping easier on Instagram and Facebook. Thank you for listening. See you tomorrow for a new episode. Have a great day. Cheers.
Yo.